Hey everyone, welcome to the Prep Coach Podcast, episode 111. We're going to do something a little bit different in this podcast. We're going to talk specifically about reverse diet and post-comp. We're going to take a trip down memory lane and rewatch some clips from past episodes where we covered this topic specifically. We're going to cover things like the challenges post-comp, binge eating, gaining too much weight and wanting to mini-cut, and how to set your calories and macros post-comp, and how to combat intense hunger. It's going to be 4 episodes. You're going to see that episode pop up on the screen before each one starts. Hopefully you do enjoy it, and we'll see you in the next one.
Is there anyone in your team that's now in a reverse or recovery phase? And how are they kind of coping with it, and what kind of things are you finding at the moment?
Yeah, so Brad, as soon as his ICN show was done, we decided to wrap it up. We got the information we needed. We knew that he just needs a little bit more size. I actually took Brad on very last minute. He left his previous coach halfway through his prep. So we had 10 weeks to essentially get him from being where he was to where he needed to be. And I think we ended up pulling off like close to 12 kilos or something like that in such a short time. So he originally thought that he was going to be at a higher weight. And as soon as we had our consult, I was like, well, I actually think this is where we're going to need to be. Mm-hmm. And we did hit that, but it was a pretty aggressive approach. And we definitely would normally not need to be that aggressive. When I say it was aggressive, I mean, I think he bottomed out at like around 2,000 calories. But if I had him for 26 weeks, he would have been eaten up and at like 2,800, on the show day, because he just has that ability. And even post-show now, he's responded really well. We take the approach typically with guys, more of a recovery approach, given that they do have to get down to pretty extreme levels of composition. There's just no point trying to reverse your way out of it, because it doesn't attenuate any of the physiological effects that you accumulate as a result of being that lean and, an extended period of energy deprivation. Yeah. So I think we put in some parameters. It was about a 3 kilogram increase in scale weight within the first 7 to 10 days. And then from there, we've just put in place some bandwidth rates of gain, which works out to be about 500 to 600 grams per week. Some weeks it might be a little bit more, then other weeks it might start to come down. And it's more or less gauging that we hit a certain point within a certain time, but also auto-regulating how he's feeling along the way. So you might say that in an ideal world, he's going to push up from 64 kilos to he needs to be at 71, 72 by at least 6 to 8 weeks. He might get to that point and he still feels equally as shit, in which case you just need to gain a bit more. So things we look for are like an increase and an improvement in sleep quality, increase in perceived energy availability, reduction of food focus, being aware of your sex hormones, so an increase in libido. They're all the things that we tend to suffer from at the back end of prep, and everyone's different. But because his prep was a lot shorter, I dare say he'll be feeling pretty much back to brand new within 4 or 5 weeks. Whereas, say, someone like yourself, like with your prep, it typically, you're like after 6 weeks, yeah, I feel really good, and then after another 6 weeks, like I feel really good, and then it's like now I feel really, really good, and I'm normal again. So it's one of those things, and I think it's very individual, but I think it depends on the category too. Like the requirements for, say, Kiara, for example, from hers, what approach are you taking with her during her reverse/recovery phase?
Yeah, so it's not going to be as drastic as someone like, Brad, where he's going to, try to gain so much weight very, very fast.
Mm-hmm.
But he's probably going to gain about a kilo or a kilo and a half within a week or two.
Yep.
Just because obviously more food volume, she's going to be storing a little bit more glycogen and things like that. So we're going with that approach. But, as I said, like they're not super lean, so their recovery is going to be pretty quick.
Sure.
She will, the usual things where you think eating more food means that you're all of a sudden going to be satiated and not hungry anymore. And it's just not the case. Like sometimes you'll find that you're going to be a bottomless pit, because it's got nothing to do with the food volume that keeps you full or not hungry anymore. It has to do with the amount of body fat that you have on, right?
Mm-hmm.
The body wants to recover. So, I've been getting those kind of comments like, I'm eating, but I'm just not full. It's like, it's just going to take time. And that's when you need to kind of keep that structure in place. And you need to make sure that the environment around you is conducive to you not falling into a hole, right? So, we always give that advice is don't just now stock your pantry with all this food that you think you've been missing out on, and don't go buy all this, really, really highly palatable food and stock that in your house. Just really, really conscious of that. And also too is, people around you, we're going to get those comments of, oh, you can eat normal again. Well,
yeah, that's right.
What's, my normal, my fit and healthy normal is different to your fat slob normal, right? So, also educating people around you that when they kind of give you those comments, it's saying, well, I'm still going to maintain my habits. I'm just eating more of the good stuff.
Yep.
So I think people need to be really, really careful, especially, socially. It's great to be social. It's great to go out. It's great to, do things that you haven't had a chance to do. But you still got to stay within control and make sure you maintain your habits and your foundation, because that's what's going to keep you stable.
Absolutely.
On track. So they're the kind of things that we try to reinstill with people that, that coming off the end of a comp, you don't have such a big goal anymore, and such a goal that's really going to make you push. Because if you've got an impending show date, you're going to make sure you're on point. Like you are going to have the drive and the motivation to make sure. Now you don't have an impending date anymore, so there's nothing that's going to really be as big as the grind that you had before. Like, you will grind through absolutely anything when you have a show coming up. Now, when someone says, hey, no show until next season, next year, but still stay on point. Still restrict yourself, still try to stay within boundaries. It's harder because you don't have that impending date where you're going to be half naked on stage and people are going to be judging you. So post-show is really hard, and that's why we say, you really got to stick with your coach during that time. People that kind of drop their coach straight after a show is like one of the worst decisions you can make, for sure.
It's the most. I truly believe that the post-prep phase is more important than the dieting component. Getting people shredded is super easy, but putting them back on the other side of the fence and putting them back in one piece requires time, and it also requires, a great deal of knowledge and experience, because otherwise, regardless of whether you're a first-time competitor in bikini or whether you're a first-time competitor in bodybuilder, they're going to be pretty murky waters when you come out of that phase. So you want someone that can help navigate and steer you through that phase and give you that direction, rather than, as you said, just being like, all right, now that I'm done, I'll touch base with you when I'm 24 weeks out from my next show. You can do a lot of harm in that phase. And it's not just about body composition. It's also from a health perspective. Like, there's a lot of things you need to be aware of. Some people have been known to suffer from a lot of gastrointestinal issues. There's so many things that you can encounter because you're not factoring in, some of the things that we would just see as no-brainers. But for someone who's inexperienced, you may just think, oh, I've been eating, a scope of maybe 12 to 14 different foods. And now that I'm done, I'm going to go and have 50 or 60 different food selections, and I'm going to do it all in the space of 3 or 4 days. Yeah. And they end up really, really sick. Or on the other side, you see people that will be out of control binging, and then they'll restrict, and it's binge, restrict, and it's a vicious cycle. Versus if you have someone that you can communicate, and it does happen where people will have a period of out of control eating, but at least that way, if you're transparent with your coach, they can give you the skills and the tools to be able to navigate your way through that, versus you just thinking, oh, I'm just going to do some cardio again today and that will undo what I've done. But what they don't realize is that there's recoil to that, because all that means is it's setting you up for another binge in 2 or 3 days' time. And it just keeps on going and going and going, versus, as you said, if you have a plan in place and you're putting in place some just basic boundaries. So I'm not saying that you can't go out and have a meal, but it might be like, let's stick to one untracked meal a week. We're increasing your food. And if you want to have a day where you don't track your food, that's okay. But let's make some rules that we have 4 protein feedings, and there needs to be at least 2 of those meals that have 3 different colored vegetables or salad matter on your plate. So you're having some variety. There's some fiber in there. Again, looking at people that may need to get a blood panel done to assess if you have any deficiencies. There's so many different things. And that's why, again, we're not trying to say this because we have a self-invested interest. It's literally just for the health and well-being for our for our athletes. It's pretty rare these days, to be honest, that you will have an athlete that will drop you, just because for the most time we'll encourage them, if they're going to stay in the sport, and hopefully if they are, then they're as serious and they treat their bodybuilding in a very similar fashion in the improvement season.
Yeah, because in the end, physically we're trying to manage their composition, right? Like all the other aspects too, but really in the end, we want to make sure that they go back to being a better 60 kilos than what they were before they started the prep.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want them to go back to their 60 kilo off season and look worse and have more body fat on them and less muscle mass, because we're trying to control the rate of gain, and that's the rate of fat gain, right? Obviously, there's going to be some muscle gain during that time for sure, right? But we all know that fat can come on a lot easier and a lot faster than muscle mass can, right? So we're trying to control that composition, because the last thing we want is for them to go back to their off-season weight, let's say it's 60 kilos, be a 60 kilos that has more body fat and is on less calories. That's the worst thing we want, right? So we're trying to do it for the best reasons, so that when they're in their off-season, they're in an even better starting point from when they ended their off season, and then obviously they can improve from there. So there is a level of restraint and restriction still in the reverse diet or the recovery phase for sure, which is difficult. It is difficult.
And the other side of that is, if you do go solo, or even if you don't, if you don't respect the recovery phase and you eat like an asshole and you end up gaining way too much body composition, it's deleterious to your improvement season, because if you hit, say, like an off-season weight that you had planned to be 12 or 10 months after you finish your first show, if you knock that checkpoint within 3 months post-show, then you're almost guaranteeing the fact that you're probably going to be an extra 15, 25% above where your coach's ideal off-season weight would be, and you're going to have to waste time dieting that fat mass off at a later point. Versus, again, it depends on the category. Like, let's say that you had Kiara, who has done bikini. She has a real opportunity once she gets that immediate little bit of fat mass on her. She can recomp out and potentially sit, only maybe 10% above where she needed to be, because the compositions of her division are very different to, say, someone like Amy or Brad or Cal or these guys who need to gain back some fat mass straight away. And then once we get them to a point where we're happy with, they're starting to feel a bit better, and we're starting to see some of those markers be ticked off, then once they get some of that immediate fat mass on, then they can slow their rate of gain down and potentially hang out at a composition that's less far away. Like, say, Cal, I'll use him as an example, he won't mind. We've had to pull off about maybe 20, 21 kilos, which and Andrew is going to be about 16 by the time it's done, which is as a result of both these boys now know that they need to respect the improvement season a bit more, perhaps start prep at a different composition. And I know firsthand, once Cal's done, we know that where his off-season weight will be, and it will be easier for him to be able to hang out at that space. And that's the advantage of the first time you compete. You get so much information. Firstly now where your stage weight is. So roughly, you don't ever want to be further than really 20% off that, because then you're just getting unnecessarily, overweight and too far away from that goal. So you can collect a lot of good data, and there's so many different learnings from it. But I guess the one takeaway that we both agree on is you have to respect that phase. And essentially, when prep finishes your last show, the way I always encourage athletes to view it is that there's still 4 weeks to go. Give me 4 weeks to put you back together, because I know that in 4 weeks, you're going to feel regardless of your category, you're going to feel so different than you do the day after your show.
Yeah.
And you've trusted your coach for this long. Keep your trust instilled in them and let them steer you through those murky waters, and then put you back on the other side of the fence. And then if you want to go and do your own thing for a bit, no dramas. But at least that way, and they know that you're going to be in one piece. Yeah.
And we're not trying to be party poopers. We're not being like, no, you can't celebrate yet. You can't go for dinner.
Not at all.
We're really not. And we actually, like, I personally feel bad. Like, because I want them to celebrate and do things I haven't had a chance to do in a long time. but I just know it's for the greater good if they just taper back on it a little bit, just wait a little bit longer, do some of those things. As we said, we should have, one or two or however many is untracked days or meals or whatever that may be, but just don't go full steam ahead.
Don't go rogue.
Yeah, don't go rogue. Just wait. It'll make all the difference. It'll definitely make all the difference. Yeah.
And in terms of celebrating meals, because typically it's the human interaction as well that comes with food brings us all together. I always advocate for just have a house party, have people over, have a barbecue, stick to foods where at least you can also control the narrative. If you want to do pizzas, do homemade pizzas. If you haven't had pizza for 9 months and then you're like, I'm going to go out and I'm going to have a Nando's or whatever it is, like a Nando's or Domino's pizza, whatever it is, there's every chance that you're going to wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning and you're going to puke your guts out. Versus if you just make a homemade one, again, you can load up on the toppings. It's going to be a better version of that. It still ticks the box of you're eating something that's palatable, you're with your friends and family. In 4 or 5 weeks' time, again, what you're able to tolerate will be very, very different to the day after your show.
Yeah, 100%. And what people are going to find is during prep, what good digestion actually feels like.
Yep. Yeah. And how bad it can be when you finish.
Yes. Yeah. And when you go out and you start having your meals, even when you're in the peak of your off season, you realize the difference. Like you really realize the difference. And I even know for myself is I look at things and I'll be like, that's a stomach ache waiting to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just by looking at things. Yeah.
And the more you do it, the more you respect and understand that. And again, I'll use myself as an example. I had a 3-year off season. I could count on one hand how many like takeaways or things like that. I think I would have had maybe Thai takeaway maybe twice. I think we might have had pizzas as a big group maybe once or twice. This is in the space of 3 years. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you can ask my wife, anyone. It's the same thing all the time. And because I love knowing that I'm going to feel good digestion-wise. You might have pizzas, you'll make them from home. I know that I'm going to wake up, I'm not going to feel sick the next day. Yeah. Even when we have our SUVs, like the next day, you're going to wake up, you're feeling good. You're not getting donuts afterwards and getting this. You can go and have a nice meal. There's some salad, there's some, flavored chicken. Yeah, there's a bit of fat, bit of like aioli, whatever. And then you can have a coffee and you're content. You don't have to eat like an asshole. And as soon as you get a few of those weeks, months behind and under your belt, it really just becomes habitual.
It does.
And this sport becomes a lifestyle rather than just living for that weekend to go out and eat burgers and fries. Because if that's where you're at, then I would argue that your relationship with food is perhaps not where it should be.
Yeah. And I've kind of said to some clients too, and I've said it probably on a potty before, is who's faking this lifestyle just to compete.
Mm-hmm. Versus those that love it for what it is in the process.
Exactly. And those who actually love this lifestyle and live this lifestyle, regardless if they have a comp coming up or not. And they're the ones that are going to be the most successful. Not only in how successful they are in their placings and how well they do, but how successful they are in the whole process. Yeah, and the way they look.
And as coaches as well, I think you would probably agree, most of the people that all of the top physique athletes that I know and the top coaches that I know live a very, very similar lifestyle to the way that we approach it and look at it. Not to say that you can't ever go out for dinner, but it's like if they're going to go out for dinner, they might choose for, say, Japanese, or it might be like steak and whatever. They're not having to go out and eat Damazi's burgers and chips and then getting donuts with milkshakes afterwards, because that doesn't, it's not going to make you feel good. And it doesn't really align with your lifestyle and what you're preaching. And for me, people that do that, it's just a bit hypocritical. Like you're doing one thing and you're preaching one message, but then you're going out and more or less doing the other. And again, I have the same belief toward, alcohol. Nothing wrong with having a drink, but if you're someone who is having to go out and you're extreme and you're drinking and you're binge drinking, it's like, is that deleterious to your health and well-being? Well, yes, it is. Mm-hmm. But also it's definitely deleterious to your ability to perform and improve as a physique, as any athlete.
Yeah.
Again, you look at the best athletes in the world, they're typically not one to consume alcohol. If they do, it's in minute doses. Might be a glass of wine or whatever it is here and there. But it just comes down to, as you said, having, I think, just some values and some habits that just align. And that's why I think that's what we've probably found, and even just through the podcast, is you develop a community of like-minded people that all have the same view, and hopefully we're able to continue to instill and drive that message.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this information is going to be really helpful for those first-time competitors that have never been through a post-comp phase before.
And if you are struggling and you are going it solo, or you have dropped your coach, I think you should reach out to, if it isn't someone that you're, like if you're moving on or parting ways with your coach, reach out and speak to someone in the industry that you know or that you respect. Doesn't have to be us. There's heaps and heaps of really, really good coaches that can give you good information that can help put you on the right path. But if you are coming to the end of your prep and you have some concerns, then firstly, you should be communicating with your coach, and your athlete should already have an understanding in terms of what they can expect. I know with my guys that are going to be finishing up next week, part of their check-in will include what the next couple of weeks are going to look like, recommendations for after the show. Even for Brad, when he finished his, he was going to go straight to have a burger and something straight away just because he'd been craving it, versus he had to have a certain meal before he went and had that, so that it didn't send him into, eating the universe in one evening. So it's having that in place and having that understanding, especially if you're a first-time competitor, so that you know what to expect. Yeah. And you know that if you do fall off the wagon, what the protocol is in terms of how do I get myself back on the right track. Mm-hmm. So communication is really important.
Yeah, definitely. And having that structure and keeping that routine in place, and your physical environment, so like what's in your kitchen is super important.
Yep.
And also your support network and the people around you, and if they're encouraging behavior that really you shouldn't be doing at this point in time whilst you're post-comp, is super important. So I always tell people, if people want to come and give you gifts and presents and they want to buy you stuff, don't get them to buy you a box of donuts or a box of cookies, right? Get them to take you out for an ice cream or take you out for something else. Because if you just buy a box and it sits in your pantry, you're probably going to either binge eat it or you're going to have one every single day for the next 7 days, right? Which is probably not the best thing to do. So just really communicate with others that you're not going back to normal, and it's, even if you were going back to normal, it's not their normal. It's a fit and healthy competitor normal. It's different. Advice on binge eating post-comp. I binged badly every day last week, probably double my reverse diet calories. I hated myself, but literally couldn't stop. I have found my feet again this week, thank God, and I feel better, but I feel this would be good for you guys to discuss. Another one was 10 days post-comp and struggling to get back into healthy eating habits. I feel like I need a break from counting calories and focus on intuitive eating. What are your thoughts? Another one was, I've fallen into bad binge eating habits. I feel so fucked and thought that I could track yesterday, but binged again today. I'm still working with a coach, and even that hasn't deterred me. I feel like I don't have any issues training, but I can't get control around my food. So, post-comp is not easy. It's really not easy. But accepting that these things are going to happen is what you need to understand. Having a really good environment, support system, someone to be accountable to, having a coach in reverse is probably the most important thing. Having that support, having a structure, having a strategy, having a plan, having someone to be accountable to, having someone that's not going to make you feel guilty, that's going to reassure you and is going to continue to try to get the best out of you, but also having an environment of people around you, a home environment set up for success, not having things that are going to tempt you, and also communicating with people that you live with and people around you that what you're trying to focus on at the moment and what you're trying to get through, and they aren't kind of trying to sabotage that situation or put you in a situation where you'll be tempted and potentially binge eat, and allowing them to have the permission to tell you off and to tell you that, hey, I don't think you should be doing that. I don't think you should be eating that. Or why is there biscuits in the pantry and things like that? Try to set yourself up for success. And I always tell everyone that's in reverse at the moment that I have in my team, firstly, I'm proud of all of them. They haven't been 100% on point, not all of them. Some of them have. But I'm proud of how they've tackled this. A lot of them are first-time competitors and the first time they've ever gone through this. And I'm really proud of the team at the moment and how they're going through. But they need to be open and honest with me and with their coach, and have that support system around them. And I need to make sure I don't make them feel guilty. We've got to put things behind us. We've got to try to improve every single day. I've got to try to get the best out of them, and I've got to try to keep them accountable. I tell them that there's kind of two things I really concentrate with someone in a reverse or in a recovery phase is mental progression and physical progression. If we could ideally do both of them to plan, and you physically progress perfectly to plan, and you mentally progress perfectly to plan, that is amazing. That's awesome. But I always tell them that mental progression is a bigger priority than physical progression, because physically, whatever you do, we can eventually fix, right? With after the off season, after things have settled down, we can eventually fix any damage you've done physically. But mentally, this is something that's a little bit harder to recover from. And we all us boys are about longevity of this sport, right? We want someone to come out of a comp and want to do this again, right? Mm-hmm. And have the goal of doing this again. And if we try to push them and make physical the priority and not mental, is they're going to crash and burn and never want to do this again, right? And that's harder to recover from than something that physically hasn't gone to plan. So always think about that, is I want to mentally progress over physical progression. Both of them are important. And if you could nail them both, then that's absolutely amazing. But you need a coach, you need a support system around you that's going to support you with that goal and understand that goal. Now, I get it that your mental progression may be self-inflicted because now you're really, really uncomfortable and unhappy with how you physically look, but that will just get better over time. And you've got to think that this is all about progression, and this week is going to be different to next week, which is going to be different to the week after. And the way you feel now, physically, mentally, will only improve as the weeks progress in your reverse and in your recovery. So if you think that this is going to last forever and how you're feeling is going to last forever and your binge eating is going to last forever, it won't. You'll eventually recover and find your feet and find that flexibility and find your happy place. So I'm all about, and you guys know, I'm all about doing what makes you happy and being positive and enjoying your life and enjoying the process and being mentally healthy and happy, and obviously also being physically healthy and happy. Sometimes those things run hand in hand, sometimes they don't, but I'll tell you now, everything will eventually recover. And especially if you have a plan in place and a coach and a strategy and you have good people around you, it's all going to work out in the end. Mm-hmm. I know you're probably worrying and stressing right now, but it's all going to work out in the end. You're not going to be binging forever. You're not going to be uncomfortable forever. It'll eventually all subside, and you'll have a successful off season, live a healthy and fit life. And it's just about getting through this tough time and putting yourself in a situation to be successful and having people around you that are going to facilitate that success too. How are you guys feeling about that? What are your client journeys at the moment? What do you feel about physical and mental progression in reverse? And if people are binge eating, do you want to start this, MG? What do you reckon?
Yeah, I just want to say that, like, just to think that you've been dieting for, say, somewhere between 20 and 30 weeks, right? And you might be really, really deep in the hole. You've been dieting on what is relevant low food for you. To think that you potentially couldn't go another 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks with food that's increasing, I promise you you can. Typically in that phase, your volume of work is going to be reduced. Things like cardio and steps get reduced. So your overall expenditure is also going to be lower, and typically your food's getting a little bit higher. So just remember this, you've been in a worse place than this and you got through it. The only difference now is you don't have that big end goal or that big end date to strive for. But you have pushed harder and you can absolutely get through it. The most important thing that I remind everyone is, if you do this correctly, if you respect the reverse diet, the recovery diet, you do it correctly, you're patient, you take your time, the thing that lies at the end of that rainbow is amazing, right? It's a recovered metabolism, eating, probably a substantial amount of food that when you get to that point, the last thing you're going to want to do is eat anything, high calorie or shit, because it's a struggle getting it all down. And that's the potential that you can get to. The thing you get along the way of that is amazing training performance, great gains, better recovery, like all these things play a part. So the psychology as to why the binge eating is happening is probably not something that, I can comment on, but I just want everyone to remember how important that process is. Trust and respect it. Try and give it your absolute best effort, because the end result is so, so worth it. And you can get to a position where you're 12, 16, 20 weeks post-show, eating, more food than you've eaten before, in a much better composition that you've ever had at that point, and your weight is just staying the same. And you're sitting there going, fuck, I can't get this food down, but my fucking weight won't go up. Like, that's a potential and that's a possibility if this thing is done correctly. So I just want to say, think about it, respect it, give it every chance to succeed, and just know that all those foods that your mind is telling you that you want to eat or you want to indulge in now are going to be there for the next 100 years. And it's like, if I use myself as an example, I'm at a point now where the last thing that I want to put down is a pizza or chocolate or something, because I just know that that's going to make me feel full or feel shit. And I've got so much food to put down. It's just, there's no part for it in my plan. So that wasn't my mindset straight after comp. I promise. It's not me saying I'm just really, I'm really strong-minded. I did want to eat that shit post-show. I did. My mind was telling me I deserve it. But I persevered a little bit, and now it's the last thing I want. So just have patience and just back yourself. Be honest with your coach. Be open with your coach. And I promise at the end, the road is worth it.
Thanks, MG. What about you, Scotty?
Yeah, for sure. I think, firstly, you're not weak or shit or anything like that. There's such a tendency to just hate yourself. Even I think some of the questions before we came on, you were saying people mentioned I hate myself for it. Yeah. I'm a big advocate of even though competing plays a toll on your physical system and your physical being, it also wears away you mentally as well. And so your mental health is just as important as your physical. So, saying that you hate yourself and you're this and you're that, firstly, that doesn't do you any good. And I think MT is one of the most positive. Actually, both you boys are extremely positive. I like to think that I'm the same. You need to look at it from, I guess, a wider scope. So why am I so obsessed with food? Because you've been in a prolonged period of energy deprivation. The one thing that you've wanted to have, you haven't been able to have it. So that, for starters, makes complete sense. Of course, I want to go and eat an ice cream or have pizza. But secondly, physiologically, especially if you're super, super lean, then it makes sense as to why that is. So the less fat mass that you have on you, the less leptin, which is a hormone that is secreted through your fat cells, is secreted within circulation. So leptin basically, like in the off season now, if you're someone like, MG who's, almost, I wouldn't say deep in your off season, but he's in a stage where he's got enough fat mass, he's well fed, food's super high. He eats his meal. He's not like, fuck, I can't wait to eat again. He's probably like, oh man, Jesus, I'm full. And that's how most people feel. Whereas when you're in prep, you can eat a huge meal and then be like, I've got 3 hours till I get to eat again. I'm still hungry, because your hunger signaling is completely in the toilet. And it's in the toilet because you don't have enough fat mass on you to secrete enough leptin for you to feel that you are satiated. That, ghrelin levels are elevated, which is our hunger hormone, and then leptin is completely downregulated. So physiologically, it makes complete sense. The only way to attenuate that is A, you need fat mass on you, and B, you need time. So you can't just come out of prep, and I give this example to people all the time from my last 2020 prep. When I came out of prep, I had to take my food. Within the first few weeks, I wasn't gaining enough fat mass. So I was at like 3,600 at the back end on a day-to-day basis. I think I had to bring my food up to like mid-5,000s, which sounds, oh my God, it's amazing. But not when you're eating specific foods. It's really not. And I can tell you in the off-season, it's even worse. But I had to do that for a certain amount of time to be able to get, I think I was only like 3 kilos up in the first 3.5, not even 4 weeks. And I was way too shredded. So I was having to push in foods that I don't even typically want to eat to get that fat mass back, because none of the hunger signaling and the food focus was going to dissipate until that acute fat mass was there. And then from there, you can start to slow things down. So in some ways, if you have a binge, it's just your body's way of, I guess, forcing your hand. And yeah, there's an element of willpower, but it's trying to get some fat mass on you so that it can feel safe again, because you've restricted from it for so long. So that's why when someone's lean, we'll employ, like all of my athletes will have a specific range in the first 10 to 14 days of fat mass they need to gain. And in the most part, for guys, it could be anywhere from 3 to 5 kilos. For girls, it could be 2 to 4 kilos. And then from there, our rate of loss will slow down. But what that fat mass does is, firstly, it allows you to enjoy some food. And I think you need to be careful with eating highly palatable foods. Like if you haven't eaten donuts and burgers, now's not the time to go and eat those foods. Wait until you're in your off season, or if you want to have a pizza, make a homemade pizza. But you need to still be mindful of your fiber, because that's another thing. We typically, athletes will throw out their normal everyday foods and go and just eat what they can, because there's no more end destination of competing. But if anything, there's more of an emphasis on getting sufficient fiber into you. I actually make all of my clients and my athletes that competed on the weekend, before they went out and ate, they had a specific post-show meal they had to eat. And for the most part, it had anywhere from 15 to 20 grams of fiber via vegetable and fruit in it. And what that does is it gets them out of their own way from, by the time that starts to metabolize, an hour and a half, 2 hours, they got their tan off, they're going to eat. Fucking hell, I'm so full. So it kind of buys that window. And then before you wake up the next morning, go to breakfast, have that. And then meal two, I want you to eat something within this range, because you can't just go from being completely narrow-minded and following, specific macros, specific foods, to just eating like an arsehole and think there's not going to be some recoil. Whereas if you can just, as MG said, just give yourself, even as a coach, I'm like, give me 2 to 4 weeks. Let me get some fat mass on you. Trust me on this process. I guarantee you, on the other side of that, you're not going to want to go and do all those things, because we'll have attenuated a lot of that. We'll give you more food. You're going to have typically 50 to 75% more food in that first initial focus. We're going to add in more fiber, stick to foods that gain some immediate fat mass, trust the process. Absolutely go out for a meal, but I'll be like, in the first week, try and just give yourself 2 meals out. And for those meals, maybe pre-plan what you want to have. If you want to go for a pizza, I'm telling you in advance that the chance of that turning into a binge is going to be high, versus go and have a steak, maybe get some French fries with your steak or something like that. And then instead of going out for dessert afterwards, maybe go home and have jelly light and maybe have some ice cream or something like that. So at least that way you can control a little bit. And I guarantee you, as time goes on and that surplus that we put you in initially starts to take its toll, all of that food focus and hunger will start to come down and you'll start to feel better. And within that space, if you want to go for a burger in 3 or 4 weeks, absolutely go for it. But I guarantee you, the desire for you to eat like an arsehole won't be there.
It just dissipates. It does.
It goes. And I can tell you, and this is living from personal experience, from working with hundreds of athletes and seeing it. We've all told you firsthand, when MT finishes, it'll be no different. His food will come way up. He'll eat the same foods, but more of them. If he goes out for dinner, don't even have to tell him, man, maybe just have a steak and order some French fries, whatever, because he knows that's what you need to do. So you just, as you said, MG, when you've come this far, just give yourself another 4 weeks. Not saying that you can't go out and enjoy yourself. You're going to be eating more food. But if you go out and have a donut and a milkshake, I can guarantee you that you're going to feel like shit. I can also guarantee that the risk of you binging is going to 5 or 6x on what you would be going through if you just ate more of the foods that you've been eating. You want to have pizzas? Make homemade pizzas. Get some pita wraps, have 5 or 6, load up on protein, go for it, versus going out and getting a greasy pizza and then having a milkshake with the donut in it and then going and getting ice cream afterwards, because this is how it starts. So be selective in what you're doing. You've gone through this first initial phase of prep. The recovery phase is even more important. So that prep isn't, the way I view it, prep isn't really over, because until you've ticked off that checkpoint, that 4-week checkpoint post-comp, where fat mass is high and we've got like at least 7 to potentially even 10% of body weight back on you, then from there, I'm always like, I feel a lot more at ease knowing that you're going to be okay, because a lot of the nitty-gritty work and the messy and the choppy seas are behind you.
Yeah. Hey, and do you remember we were talking about that post-show meal, right? Scott, remember the conversation? You were there when we were talking to Elise, and we were backstage, and she said, yeah, you remember how you allowed me to go out and have a burger? She's like, I barely wanted it because you made me eat that meal. Remember after the show, she was like,
Yep,
I couldn't
exactly
eat
right.
it. I couldn't eat anything because I was already so full. So like anyone that is like competing, that isn't coached by us, think about that in your plan. Is like after stage, employ something where you have a high fiber, high volume meal, because that alone will play a big part in stopping you from going off the rails that night.
Yeah, definitely. Like, well said, boys. Like, that's amazing advice. I think, setting your environment up at home for success is really important too. Like, I know for myself is when I get home and I top up my food and I go to a grocery shop, there's things I won't buy. I know, even though potentially I could have and I got the calories and macros to do it, I know there's things I won't buy. I know I'm strong-minded and strong-willed, but I still want to set myself up for success. There's things that I just won't want to put in my pantry just yet.
100%.
So make sure you do that. You set your home environment up right. People around you, especially, you got to think fit and healthy people we're a minority, right? So people around you are going to be like, oh, you can eat normal again. Yay. Here's a box of donuts. I had a client that got cookies delivered to her house. I was like, give them away and make a public service announcement that you do not want those things at your house, right? If they want to have them with you, go out and have them somewhere, because it requires a lot of energy and planning for you to go out and have a cookie with someone or a dessert with someone that maybe eventually you probably don't even want to do it. And if you had it at home, they're just lingering and they're waiting and they're staring at you and you're more likely to binge. So set yourself up for success at home. Set yourself up for success by communicating with everyone around you so that they don't tempt you and sabotage your situation and try to make them like them, mediocre, normal, not fit and healthy, if you want to call it that, right? Because that's the majority of people that are going to be around you unless you live with another bodybuilder or something like that. And try to maintain all those habits that you've done so well at in prep. Planning, preparing your food, sticking to the same foods that you've majority had the whole time, making sure you're scheduling things, making sure you know when you're training, when you're eating, what you're doing. Yeah. Especially if you're going back to normal life, which is a 9-to-5 job where your schedule is normal and you have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and your breakfast is at home, your dinner's at home, and your lunch is at work. Just go back to your normal routine. Go back to a routine that you always had throughout prep, except you just want a little bit more food, and you'll be able to execute. And then I tell people too, you have 2 untracked flexible meals out. Go out and enjoy your social time with people, because that's what you've really missed out on. Yeah, you've missed out on some foods, but you've really missed out with social time and not having to worry about what's on your plate and tracking what's on your plate. And go and enjoy that time with people, not sitting at home eating ice cream because you haven't been able to eat ice cream and you're going to go and sit on the couch by yourself eating ice cream. That's not a good position to put yourself in, and it's going to be a detriment to you, and you're putting yourself in a position to binge. So I think there's a lot of good advice there. There's reasons why we're food focused, why we need to stay on track from a body composition standpoint. Things will get better. Setting yourself up for success. It's okay if you do go off track. Have someone to be accountable to. Make sure you have a coach with a plan that you can communicate with.
Set limits.
Set limits. They're not going to make sure they are someone that you feel comfortable chatting to. They're not going to make you feel guilty. They're going to reassure you of the process. And
just remember, MT, you said a good point, right? Most of it's around the social aspect. That's what you've missed. You would never go to a restaurant with friends pre-prep and eat till you're sick. You would never do it. People say, "Hey, you get to eat normal now." So you get a box of donuts and eat a whole box of donuts. You never ate a whole box of donuts. That's actually it's not normal. Your mind's saying that now it's normal. So find something social, go out, make the effort, and just eat normally. It can be managed so fine. Like you can still have a successful off season and a successful reverse and have a social life.
Eat your fit and healthy normal, not a normal person's normal. And I said it to a lot of my clients too. I was like, when you go out, eat like a non-starving, fit and healthy adult.
That's it.
Right? Not like a normal, let's call them a normal person. Because a normal person will probably load up their plate and have a milkshake and have a dessert and have an entree and get garlic bread and all the other stuff too. That shouldn't be our normal if you want to be fit and healthy and you want to sustain a healthy physique.
A little, just before we wrap that up, a tip and perhaps recommendation I can give, and this is something that I personally do when I'm coming out of it, is because I know eating out it's just on whatever it is after that long, it's not going to agree with me. People that I haven't caught up with, I invite them over. They come to our house for dinner. Come and eat. And that way, in some ways, you can put on a massive barbecue, or you can cook. You can do homemade pizzas, whatever. You can control the narrative, but at least that way, it's an environment. Don't track. Eat it. You might make homemade pizzas. Put heaps of them on, or it's a barbecue. It's still a social, event, which is something, as we said, that you've missed. But at least this way, it's not someone being, like you said, they're eating Parmesan chips and they're like, oh, come on, you've been dieting, get a sundae with me. Like, you can eat in your environment and you can enjoy that. Again, I'm not saying long term, but in that initial phase, if people want to go out and do that, you can make a suggestion. Just come to mine. We'll do a massive barbecue, or we'll do an Italian night, whatever it is. But at least that way,
Mr. Italian,
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Was that
maybe go and see Alcione.
Did you just invite me and MT over for dinner? Is that what I heard there?
Man, absolutely. That's what this legit. That's one of the best to do, because at least that way there's no cap on having to get out there. You can put on heaps of food. You can relax. You can socialize. Maybe it's just me. I personally find that better. Just going out.
As soon as you're back from Bali, pop in.
Yeah, bro.
I love it. That's great.
As soon as MT finishes, I want to do a hectic, all in just a homemade Italian spread.
Yes.
Yeah, man.
I'm in.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. That's good.
For sure. That's what I've missed with you guys. I don't care about the food. I just want to hang out with you guys and just eat and just not worry about counting calories and macros and just sit with you guys and just eat.
Yeah, just like go and get a bowl of pasta and then whatever it is, it is.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
It's X amount of weeks post-comp. They've gained all this weight. Some of them are back to their off-season weight. Now they feel miserable about how they look and they want to do a cut. Tell us, Scotty, why would that be a really, really bad idea? And I'm pretty sure you're going to cover things like metabolism, hunger, adherence, and that kind of stuff. So let's have it.
Pretty much. Yeah, so it does happen quite a lot where for the last, say, 30 weeks, your goal has been to wake up in the morning, look at the scale and hope that the number is less than it was the day prior. And then straight away, the goal is to gain some fat mass, but perhaps you are gaining at a rate that isn't as originally planned, and that's as a result of just hedonic feeding, so eating for pleasure rather than eating to satiate yourself and to fuel your energy demands. And so when that happens, and some people do it, and I actually had one of my athletes, I won't name who they are, and it happens all the time. There's nothing to be ashamed of, where they just got a little bit carried away in the first week and were just eating uncontrollably, and it does tend to happen. And then saying, I think I want to just cut, I'll pull my macros back, and even volunteered that perhaps, we're doing some cardio. What are you doing? We haven't done cardio this whole time. Like, the fact that this has happened is as a result of physiologically your body isn't at a stage yet where you can identify when you're hungry. So unfortunately, when you expose yourself to highly palatable foods, so if you're eating out a lot as opposed to like we advocate on the podcast, just giving yourself a few weeks, still eating more food, but perhaps prepping it yourself, not trying to fit this into your intakes and fit that, and just give your body the time that it needs to start to transition. You can't just go from all to just nothing. It doesn't work like that. So if you do that, say you're up 7 or 8 kilos in the first week, and then you're like, oh, maybe I should drop my food, I can guarantee you that when you do that and you restrict your calories, that you will have another binge, because it's just a cycle. And that's what happens, unfortunately, where people, they binge, then they restrict, then they binge, and they restrict. So this would come as a surprise to all the people, but this person was eating 3,800 calories and just didn't have any control. So the first thing that I did was we actually made a 600 calorie push on what they were eating. And you might think, well, why on earth would you want to give them more food? Because if we look at that, let's say that over the period of a week, 600 calories times 7 days is 4,200 calories. So that 4,200 calories is going to equate for around about 600 grams of mixed human tissue in terms of surplus that we're gaining. I would rather that than if you don't give them that extra food, or if you reduce their calories, they might have 2,000 one day, 2,000 the next, and then they'll have 12,000 the next day. After that, it'll be 10,000, and then 8,000, and they'll restrict again. But when you look at the net caloric intake for the week, it might be like 35,000, 40,000 calories. instead of you could have just given them a controlled amount that's going to be conducive to them getting to where they need to get to. So sometimes the best way to get someone out of their own way in that sense is to just say, look, we're not really at the right stage to be able to perhaps go out and just eat ad libitum and just eat what we want when we want. So we're going to increase your food. These are some recommendations. These are the foods you enjoy eating when you're in prep. Let's eat those foods, but more of them. And then just give me 2 weeks, and then let's see how you feel. And then journal during this time and tell me how you feel at the end of the day. I'm super full, increasing their fiber, things like that. They're tools that we have at our disposal as practitioners to be able to help people get out of their own way. Because if you do restrict, then I can guarantee you it will lead to another binge. And whatever you've gained, unfortunately, you've gained some. That sucks. I feel for you. But the goal isn't to be shredded anymore. So you just sort of have to wear that. And I can guarantee if your weight does jump like 8 kilos, so like this athlete of mine, their weight even though we increased their food by 600 calories, their weight came down by 2 kilos that following week. Because majority of that food, well, not majority, that some of it definitely was fat mass, but there's definitely a lot of water retention, foods that are high in sodium, and also an abundance of food volume that has completely destroyed your digestion. So your bowel movement regularity is just completely, wiped. So there's a lot of food volume that's still there. And obviously, as we spoke about, water and sodium. So if you just give yourself that time, and then if you're like, oh, well, now I'm only 7 kilos up over the 2 weeks, that's not as bad. And then the week after, maybe you only gain another kilo, which is 8. And then over 3 weeks, 8 kilos is a net increase, isn't as bad. And then eventually, after 5 or 6 weeks, that food focus and that hedonic eating, it won't be there. And then you'll be in a position where, you can go out and not have to eat like an arsehole just because you don't have any control of your body.
Yeah, so we kind of discussed that in the last podcast, is setting yourself up for success during a reverse. Making sure you keep all your comp prep habits, prepare your food, keep that same structure in place, try to eat the same food you had in prep, just more of it. If you introduce highly palatable foods, you're not going to be able to control yourself. Don't pack your cupboard with peanut butter and Biscoff and stuff that you haven't had, which are going to be super tasty. When you get one little bite of it, and even if you're trying to only add 10 grams to one meal, that before you know it, you're in the pantry and you finish the jar, right? So it's about not introducing food that you know is going to be way too tasty, and you're not going to be able to stop any cravings and will turn into a binge. If you do go out, try to be conservative. Again, try to limit when you're going out, how much you're going out, and having your flexible untracked meals. Make sure that they are conservative, and it's not about the food, it's more about the company and the socialization and things like that. But what I want to answer in that question is, okay, now we're 4 or 5 weeks post-comp, we've gained way too much body fat, way too much, right? Why is it a bad idea to do a cut now? Is our metabolism going to be able to handle a cut? Are our hunger hormones going to be able to handle a cut? Are we going to be able to adhere to a cut?
Definitely not. So physiologically, you're still not going to be restored. Mm-hmm. So typically, however long you prep for, like half that time, and that's really usually how long it's going to take until you're back in a really, really good place. So if you prep for 30 weeks, you're looking at roughly around about 15 weeks till you're going to be feeling, pretty good again. There won't be any food focus. You won't have any of those diet-related perturbations that you do encounter when you're in the contest prep. But the amount of metabolic adaptation that we encounter is going to be individualized. So it's person specific and person dependent in terms of how deep down the rabbit hole you have to go with your calories. So that would influence how your body would respond to running it again. But rather, you just put your body through the absolute ringer. Unfortunately, if that's the way that it's happened, my advice when that does happen is we just have to wear that for now. At the end of the day, your body's not in a position where you might think, oh, I'm just going to run a 3-week mini cut after 4 weeks of eating stupid. It's the worst thing that you can do, because you might diet off 3 kilos if you're fortunate enough within that time, even though physiologically your body is no longer primed for fat loss. Yeah. Because it wants to feel safe in an energetic environment again, because it hasn't. It's been in caloric restriction for an enormous amount of time. So your body needs to feel safe again before it's going to allow you to start taking from that again. But if you do, all you're going to do is re-heighten and resensitize all of those things that you've been trying to address. So you might pull off 3 kilos doing that little bit of cardio and the mini cut, but I can guarantee you 4 weeks after that, you're going to go on another binge episode again because you haven't given your body what it needs, which is time and which is a consistent supply of energy availability.
Yeah. So metabolism probably won't handle it as well. It's not fully recovered yet. You'll try to do a cut. Maybe you'll cut some weight. Won't be as efficient as you normally would. It might be you have to dig a little bit deeper to take the weight off than what you normally would. Maybe cut your calories a little bit harder than what you normally would because the metabolism's not repaired and replenished where it needs to be. Say you do last it and you do adhere to it and you stick to it and you last for 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. Post that point, you're going to be back in the same position as when you finish comp prep. All those hunger signals, your metabolism's going to be in a shit position. You're probably going to regain all the weight that you just tried to lose, and you're going to feel miserable, where you could give yourself more time to recover, repair, and sit with the fat that you gained and just deal with the fact that you're just in that position. And then once everything's recovered and you've given yourself a little bit more time, maybe you're 12 weeks post-comp or you're 3, 4, 5 months post-comp, then do your mini cut. And it's probably going to be more successful than if you try to do it a month or 2 post-comp.
And the advantage to pick a positive from a bunch of negatives, if that is you, the advantage that you have is that by gaining such a large amount of fat mass immediately, if you can slow that down and then just gradually gain, if it's 500 grams or if it's 0.5 to 1% of body weight a week from there on after, you will recover faster than the person who just tries to gain 300 grams a week. Like I've seen on social media, people being like, 3 weeks post-comp and I'm only 1 kilo up, like everything's going so great. I would say, well, things aren't really going as great as you think they are, because if you're only a kilogram up, you might still look awesome in a bathing suit, but you're not addressing any of the issues that are going on internally. So all you're doing is prolonging the inevitable. Eventually you will gain that weight, and if it was me, I'd rather let's get back to feeling good again, and then rather than just dwelling on what's already been done, you might be able to, if you gain 8-10 kilos in the first 2 weeks, which is a lot of weight, but then you can slow it down, and over an 8-week period, you're only 14 kilos up. Is it ideal? Maybe not. That's quite aggressive, but it's not the end of the world. But then let's say another 10 weeks after that, you're going to feel amazing, and maybe you're 18 kilos up from where you were. But you might say, okay, well, now it's been 5 months. We're going to run a 4-week aggressive mini cut. We're going to pull 2,000 calories a day. We'll pull off 5 kilos in 4 weeks. And then from there, we'll slowly bring food up. That 4-week mini cut is not going to be enough in terms of an amount of time in a deficit to cause any serious diet-related, perturbations that are going to result in you being super focused. You might be hungry at the end of it, but you're not going to have any of these physiological side effects that you get from a 20-week prep. So when it's like, all right, now we're going to just bring food back up slowly again, you're not going to be like, I need to go and eat the entire world, because all of those systems have been restored.
Yeah.
So when we look at the plan over a 6-month time span, it's not really going to matter. Versus the person who just goes slower. Yeah, you might want to look good in summer, but it just depends. Like, if you're really that obsessed with looking a certain way, if you are, then I would just say that perhaps physique competitiveness is not really for you, because if you just want to look good in a bikini, then why don't you just get yourself in good shape and then hover around the same amount of calories? Because if you want to compete and you're going to get into really, really good condition, it comes at a cost. And that cost of doing business is that you've got to gain some fat mass back straight away. And also, if you're trying to improve your physique, we've spoken about this before, the physique that you look the best at will never correlate with the physique that you perform the best at. And the physique that you perform the best at is the physique that's going to allow you to gain new tissue and to improve as an athlete.
Yeah.
So if you want to improve and get better, then, like, I know for me, the physique where I feel horrendous and I'm heavy and I get puffed walking upstairs at 105 kilos, I don't like aesthetically that as much as how I look when I'm 92 kilos and I've got abs. But what I can do in the gym at 105 kilos versus at 87 or 88 kilos or 90 kilos is chalk and cheese. And I know where all my new muscle's been gained. It's been gained when I've been eating 5,500 calories and doing the things that I don't want to do, but it's allowing me to make those changes. So you just have to decide if you're not willing to embrace that, and not everyone has to go to those extremes in terms of food, everyone's going to be different, and this is probably more towards females because I tend to think that perhaps they get a little bit more caught up because there does tend to be a little bit more body dysmorphia with females, that you just got to embrace yourself, embrace your curves. If you're a little bit heavier and you don't look as great in your eyes in a bikini as what you did when you were on stage, who cares? If you can squat 2 plates and hip thrust 140 kilos, like, celebrate that. That's where your attention should be. And that's where, like, coaching wise, something that I place a lot of emphasis on when we come out of the prep is, rather than worrying about what we're seeing on the scales, I put more attention to what we're seeing on the spreadsheet in terms of our periodization. Like, how are our numbers in the gym tracking? Like, are you getting more volume? Are you lifting more weight? Because if you can shift your focus from the scales to the numbers that you're lifting in the gym, mentally, it makes it so much easier and so much better, because now your focus is not what I see when I look down first thing in the morning. It's when I go into the gym, like, I'm squatting 3 plates today, or I want to deadlift 120 kilos, whatever it is, whatever your goals are. Yeah. So just shift your focus, and that will make life so much easier. And it makes the process and just competing so much better. When you're in prep, the focus is to get shredded. When you're out of prep, the focus is to get strong and to get jacked.
How do you guys structure reversing for a client post-show? Straight back to predicted maintenance, then slowly increase? How do you know when to cap calories or how much body weight it should go up to? Maybe you want to start, Scotty?
Yeah, I think reverse or recovery, I mean, it depends on the athlete. If you're a bikini, we've discussed this multiple times. If you're a bikini competitor, you probably don't need to enter a recovery phase unless you've lost enormous amounts of weight and you're very, very lean. But the recovery phase, obviously the goal is to retreat to a body composition that's conducive to optimizing health and essentially reversing the diet related adaptations that more or less have accumulated over just a lengthy period of energy deprivation. So things like food seeking behavior, immunological downregulation, potentially disruption to the menstrual cycle, all of the things that are combated with low energy availability. So they're things that we want to try and correct, and essentially we want to get out. It's one of those things, we need to be lean to compete, but equally we want to get in and get out. So in terms of some just really raw generic numbers, I'll usually put in place, a rate of gain of 3 to 5% of body weight, usually in the first sort of 10 to 14 days or 7 to 14 days. Everyone's different. This is if you're very, very lean. And then from there, you'll usually find that to do that, you need to bring food up so that food's at a stage where you are gaining at a rapid rate, because the goal is to get that essential fat mass on straight away. And then once you get to that point of essentially 5% up or thereabouts above stage weight, and some people get there a bit quicker than others, some people have to work a lot harder to do that. Then from there, you would usually notice a pretty acute response in terms of sleep is better, mood is better, and some of those food seeking behaviors for some may even be gone. Everyone is different. And then from there, we'll usually employ a slower rate of gain. I normally have a benchmark of around 10 to 12% above stage weight, usually at anywhere from sort of the 6 to 8 week out mark. And from that point, athletes are usually in a better position to be able to start to give them a little bit more of a control in terms of starting to be able to take the reins. A lot of my athletes prefer to still be very regimented in terms of following some nutrition and having some sort of firm guidelines, because when you are very, very lean, that element of being able to just go out for a meal or understand where satiety is can be a little bit skewed. So I think having something that's still pretty structured, especially if you think you've been in prep for 30 plus weeks, to just say, all right, cool, now I'm done. Now I'm just going to go back and flexibly diet. You might want to incorporate some pizza or have this or have that. And from a digestive perspective, you just may not be at that stage where you can tolerate that just yet. And then you end up with all sorts of gastrointestinal duress. So I think working off those numbers of roughly 3 to 5% of body weight within the first sort of 7 to 14 days, and then slowing things down from there. But again, there's times where sometimes that doesn't do it. And I've had athletes that if let's say that they're going through an overfeeding issue, or they might be, binging and resulting in binge deplete, where they're restricting themselves, then I'll usually feed them more, and then I'll just continue to increase, feed them more. Don't use the whole, okay, I want you to do some cardio to eliminate it. The body just needs to feel safe again, and everyone's set point is going to be different. Some people can get through pretty uninvasively, and others need to push a bit harder in terms of regaining a bit more. So it's usually going to depend on the individual, but they're just some basic parameters I guess you could work within.
The only other part of the question I think they maybe wanted an answer to is about the calories. They said, do you go back to predicted maintenance, then slowly increase? How do you set that first jump?
Well, if it's a recovery diet and you're looking to regain fat mass, maintenance isn't going to regain. I mean, you might regain some muscle glycogen, but we're not trying to restore glycogen saturation. We're trying to add more adipose tissue. So again, if you work off a premise of, kilo of mixed human tissue around 6,000 calories, and you want them to gain, I don't know, say 2 kilos in the first week, then, you might need to add an extra 12,000 calories roughly, but it's all relative. Like I had one of my figure competitors, and I won't give exact numbers because again, people can get caught up on that, but her intakes at the back end were very low. So I didn't send her straight to 3,500, but she's had like an 800 calorie increase on what she was on. Similar to if I had someone that was dieting on 2,000 calories, they may need to go up to say 3,500. It's always going to be context dependent on the individual, but you want to use obviously the scale weight as a guide, but also using your eyes. So you should see the physique start to fade. You should see some of the lines start to dissipate. If they got shredded glutes, they're things that you would hope to see to go. But equally, you'll know as well because cognitive function's better, mood's better, sleep's better. They're all the things that you're looking out for. And then ideally getting some blood panel markers done as well, so you can see just how far in the hole you are, and equally use that as a guide to assess in 3 months where you're at on the other side.
Yeah, if I was to kind of give a generic range of the first bump I give most people, it's going to sit somewhere between the 500 cal to 1,000-ish. It's going to be somewhere in there, that first kind of bump. Remember, I mostly coach smaller, lighter females. And yes, some of them are fitness athletes that are very, very lean, but compared to maybe some of the people that you coach where they're maybe bigger boys, maybe that jump is a little bit bigger. But that's kind of where I'm normally finding most people. How about you, MG? Where do you normally find that first bump? If you just give a round number of how many calories you give that first jump up to.
Oh, man, like literally just to give an example of, 2 out of the 3 athletes that have gone into reverse from the weekend, one would be right at the bottom end of that range, which is basically 500. And then my physique guy basically went up 1,000, man. So pretty much bang on the money.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. Okay. Let's give some people some numbers.
And it's also not just about what you're feeding. It's also the expenditure. So if you've got someone that's doing cardio 6 days a week, then maybe now they're only doing it 3 days a week. And maybe it was an hour, and maybe now it's just 30 minutes or 45 minutes. And then you're gradually tapering that down as well.
Yeah. And the other thing that played a part into those decisions as well was, like my bikini girl, Becky, from the weekend, we started her diet a lot earlier because, we wanted to get to a level we'd never gotten before. So she's been dieting for a lot longer. So the amount of weeks that she'd been doing it for also played a part into how aggressive I went in because, she was feeling the effects a lot more than someone who had been dieting 8 weeks less.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Actually, another question we got, which I think is really, really important to address is the intense hunger spoken about post-comp due to people introducing more variety and then craving more? Or is it just a side effect of increasing calorie, even if they're using the same food? One of the things that we see is even if someone is on the money, so like they are just doing everything that we ask, keep routine, schedule the same, increase their food, don't introduce new things, make sure they're not highly palatable foods, all that kind of stuff. Even though we bump their calories up by 500 or 1,000, their hunger is even more intense than what it was in prep. Do you know the reasons why, Scotty, someone might be feeling that even though you're eating more food?
Well, if you think about food-seeking behavior, and it is normal that we see, hyperphagia, which is just extreme, basically unsatisfied drive to continue to consume food, and also hedonic eating, which is more or less eating for pleasure. Because you think about the one thing that you haven't been able to have a lot of, and that is food, and also the flexibility to eat what you want. For a lot of people, it's incorporating foods they haven't had. And so sometimes the food volume may be lower, but the energy density is a lot higher. But also their body doesn't have the ability to let them know when they're satiated, when to terminate a meal. When you're in the off season and you've got like 3 spoonfuls left of oats, but you're just so full from the night before, you don't feel like I have to eat that. Whereas in prep, you could have gone out, had a huge feed the night before, but you don't have the ability to shut off and say, nah, you're full, terminate the meal. You just keep eating until you get to that point where leptin is high enough that you are in a position that you don't need to have that desire to eat. So some of it is physiological, but a lot of it is also just that mental, having the one thing that you haven't been able to have And then, and that's why I think having some stability and some control in terms of still being regimented in that period out of the contest prep, the recovery reverse phase, is still very important, because in my experience, athletes are usually on the other side of the fence a lot more efficiently and a lot better, as opposed to if they just say, oh, I'm going to run my own. In the past, when I've had people say, oh, I'm just going to do my own thing now, I'm good. And then you hear from them 3 or 4 months later and they've got lots and lots and lots of issues: relationship with food, the excessive weight gain, digestive problems. And it's because there just wasn't that element of respect given to that period. So you're still, even a week after prep, you're still in rough seas. You need to take the time. That's why you need to have a coach to steer you through those murky waters. I would say that the first 4 to 6 weeks post prep, are the most important weeks within the whole contest prep. Yeah, you want to look good, but equally, if you don't get those weeks right, you're going to have a pretty rough time, potentially 6, 12 months concluding when you get off stage. And then you're going to have to spend so much time trying to correct all those things, whether it's, relationship with food, whether it's, getting your body composition back to where you were. So you really do have to be very careful.
Would you say it's more of a mental thing that's going on there when, you're in prep 1 week and you're on zero, like no food, and then you're 1 week into reverse and your food's been doubled, but your hunger is tripled? Do you think it's more so, I just don't have a goal anymore? It's just more of a mental thing? Like nothing is really stopping you from eating so much because your comp is over. You're not going to get judged half naked on stage anymore. And now your goal is not as sexy. Your goal is literally don't get fat fast. That's it.
Yeah, there's definitely that element, 100%. The goalposts have been moved, and you don't have that short-term why, anymore. Plus, you'll also see an increase in sometimes feeding people more. You just see expenditure go up too, because it's like you bring them back to life. They wouldn't clean the house, they wouldn't wash the car, all those things they weren't doing, and now they're doing them. And then it just continues to feed that cycle. So if you do see that happen, they're usually the ones you got to feed more.
MG, what do you think are some of the biggest things that we need to try to really drill home to those competitors when they are going to the reverse? Is it things like keeping everything as similar as possible as what is in prep? Is just obviously you're doing less and you're eating more.
Yeah, man. Consistency is key. I think, still planning and, prepping meals is a really big one that I'm a big advocate for, and making sure that, we speak about this regularly. Just not buying things, anything that's in the house that's highly palatable that you haven't had for 28, 30 weeks is likely to be eaten. But if it's not in there, it's a lot harder for it to be consumed. And that's why I always say, and this is something MT used to say a lot, back in the days, like go out with a family member or a friend, or go have a coffee, or go to a cafe. And if you want to have a slice of something, do that. But then it's done and it's gone. It's not just sitting in your house for you to be bored and go and get whenever you want. So I think that's the biggest thing. And I think just education from a coaching standpoint, pre-finishing your season, so you've got a bit of an idea as to what reverse is going to feel like, what challenges you're going to have, but equally how to implement these type of strategies to set yourself up for success. But I think the biggest one is just about what you surround yourself with and who you surround yourself with, and not allowing yourself the free for all that a lot of people do the second they walk off stage, where it's let's jam whatever I can in my mouth. That's really not setting yourself up for success.
Hope you enjoyed that episode. Please let us know if you have any questions about reverse diet and post-comp, and we'll see you in the next one.